Okay, awesome. So I want to welcome everybody. This is my first Zoom meeting, and this is my first meeting coincidentally for the Miami Board of Realtors. I just want to really give a shout out and special thank you to Kevin Porcelli, Jeff Coriolan, Megan Probst, and Dania Diaz. I think Dania, I saw her, she's here. So great thanks to you guys for really putting my name out there and pushing this. I really appreciate it. So just a little bit about myself, because you're like, okay, this is just another appraiser. Like, who's this guy? My name is Mahmoud. I go by Moody. Last name S-I-R, sir. I've been appraising just shy of 18 years. I started out in Weston with Rosenthal Appraisals. That's where I cut my teeth. And within 2 years of joining Rosenthal Appraisals, even as a trainee, I was managing the entire office of 12 appraisers, including state certifieds. And I was so comfortable that I decided, I don't need to get my state cert. So even though I was eligible to go ahead and get my state cert, I didn't want to. I thought I was going to have that position forever, very comfy and good. So I waited like 5 years. So, long story short, things happened. The mortgage fallout happened. In fact, my supervisors lost their license. So that kind of, put a fire under my butt, and I, went and got my state cert, and then I kind of went on my own. So I pretty much covered Dade, Broward, and Palm Beach. I used to live in all 3 counties. So usually, realtors get nervous when they get an appraiser to come from Miami and they're in Broward. They see like a 305 number. Everybody's like, whoa, this guy doesn't know my area or something like that, But I think you got to qualify that appraiser and say, hey, have you lived here? Do you have knowledge of the area? Do you work this area? Those are valid questions, which, yeah, you can ask that to an appraiser. My background, I was born and raised in Germany, and my parents are of different cultures. My mom is Romanian. My father is from Sudan, from Africa. And yeah, we end up here in Florida, like everybody else. So South Florida, to be exact. So that's a little bit about myself. The way that pretty much I want to handle this, and just to give you a quick outline, is the topic is how to properly price a listing. So I definitely want to hit on that and how you can better prepare for an appraisal, how to talk to an appraiser, and really from there, I just want to jump into like questions and answers. I think I've done a lot of these in person. The last probably 10 I've done, like it was a tour for Coldwell Banker. They all usually last a long time because there's a lot of questions and answers, and I'm here to help you and answer any questions that you have to the best of my ability. And I feel that is the best format to keep you guys engaged. I don't like, technically giving speeches. So we'll try to get through this first part. And then, I'm going to open up the floor to your guys' questions, and you don't have to, put the video. I don't need to see. As long as I can hear you, that's fine. So, having said that, I want to jump right into like, what do appraisers consider like comparables? And that distinction needs to be framed in the manner in which, the industry is working right now. And what I mean to say by that is realtors, for the most part, are doing their research using RPR, Realist, IMAP, Zillow, Redfin, Trulia, or a combination of those, services. And those are fine, and everyone has its merit. Some are better than others. But the problem is that if you were to take a property and research all of them, you're going to get a very large difference, like a gap between the high and the low. And it's just going to leave more questions than answers. So, I guess the answer is you have to take every one of those with a grain of salt, because some days, I double check, after I've completed an appraisal, I'm say, okay, let me go into Zillow and see what it says. And it could be pretty accurate, pretty close. And other times it's way off. And that goes for every one of those services. So I think that in the future, they're going to hone down, and they are becoming better. So maybe my, vocation is going to be obsolete. I think that there are going to be niches within appraising that will always be needed, but perhaps for the, larger part, maybe it will reach a level of obsolescence where those services are, very reliable, unless there's some outliers, and then they say, okay, now let's have an appraiser look at it. So I have been, over the past, I would say, year and a half to 2 years, getting a lot more private appraisals. I think that as a professional realtor, and I'm so happy to see so many people joined in on this class, you should have an appraiser in your toolbox, just like you have an LO, a loan officer, a handyman, an inspection guy. You should have an appraiser, and I'm here, I'm soliciting myself for that service, but it doesn't have to be me. It could be anybody that you gel with, somebody that you trust, somebody that knows what they're doing, somebody that can articulate to you and their client everything that has to do with appraising. So, I strongly encourage you, in situations where you have pricing issues, to reach out and talk to an appraiser that could, kind of guide you. So, having said that, do appraisers look and use those services? I would say that we only look at it in the context of, so that we know what the clients might be looking at. That's the only reason that an appraiser would look at those services, to say, okay, so, maybe they didn't get an appraisal, maybe they, priced their property on this Trulia or this Redfin or this Zillow. And so just so we have some idea of where things are coming from. From an appraiser standpoint, we just use the bread and butter, which is the MLS. Just to touch on this topic real quick, are we looking at the property cards? Yes. Are we looking at the sales through the county? No. The reason we're not looking at the sales through the county is because the county includes properties that were listed on the MLS as well as FSBOs. We haven't used FSBOs since 2007. So they're not relied upon. Sometimes if you pull those and give them to an appraiser, if we don't see that they're on that they were listed on the MLS exposed to the open market, we are not going to use those. By the way, if you want to take notes for questions about what I talked about to follow up later, please take some notes for now, and then when we get into the Q&A section, we'll address those. So FSBOs are no longer, and have not been in for quite a while. The reason for it, in a nutshell, is we cannot confirm the information that we need to put into an appraisal when we use FSBOs. We don't know, are those arm's length transactions? Were there any seller concessions? What was the condition of the property? remember, when we get a listing, we're looking at the listing remarks, we're looking at when it was listed, what the price changes were. We have so much information. And then we have pictures. And guess what? Appraisers know and realtors know that if the realtor only puts in 1 or 2 pictures, it's a dog. There's nothing to show. That means it's either average or below average. So even that tells us something, for the most part. There's exceptions. But so this is the reason we're not going to use for sale by owners. And this is basically driven by the market. You know, when we have underwriters tell us, why are you using this instead of a property that was listed on the open market, you know, and add a comp? So then it becomes a habit. We don't even offer those FSBOs anymore. Or when they sell it to Fannie Mae and it goes through a process called where they like check and cross-check and see like what our peers are doing versus what we're doing, and we get a review on it, they don't want to see the FSBOs. So FSBOs are out. There are some exceptions. I'll give you a quick one. I do appraisals for a mortgage company out of New York that provides lending to the Hasidic Jewish community. So when they send me to an appraisal in North Miami, for instance, a lot of those participants in the market do not use realtors. Many of them don't. So then you don't have listings. You don't have properties that were exposed to the market. In those cases, yes, I have knocked on the door. I go to every door, I knock on it, I talk to the owner, I'll talk to the title company, usually it's an attorney's office, and I will fill in the blanks. Of course, those are very expensive appraisals, they're very different, and there's a lot of narrative, there's a lot of what I have to talk about what I did and how I did it and why I didn't use MLS comps. So there are some exceptions, but for the most part, if we have properties that are listed, and I do realize people are now sometimes using Zillow, so appraisers do check Zillow, I do, and other listing services, because maybe they didn't use the traditional MLS. So in those cases, yes, we do use that as a secondary listing service where we check. So going to what are the comps? What are comps for us? We go to the MLS, and there's the first thing that we have to do is say, okay, where is the subject property located, and find what is the neighborhood. Okay, that is very important. So the neighborhood could be where we pull a circle, okay, from the subject property a mile out. Okay. If we could have, I'm sorry.
We're hearing something like a.
Yeah, there's somebody that hasn't muted themselves. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay.
So you were saying that the first thing you look at is the neighborhood.
The neighborhood, yes. So an easy way to do that is, it's either the neighborhood is like major boundaries that are around the subject property. Those could be like a major road, okay? It could be like a river. It could be a something that delineates the neighborhood from one to the other. And sometimes when you look even just at the satellite imagery, you can see, oh, these lots are bigger than ones that are, to an adjoining neighborhood. That right there could tell you, okay, that is the should be the delineation of the neighborhood boundary, let's say to the west or to the north or to the east or south.
Yeah,
Sorry?
at work, I go take a walk, go to the kitchen.
Sorry. Can you guys please mute?
Yeah, if you're going to be talking in the background, please mute it. Please mute it so that it doesn't disturb the other people from listening. Okay, so that is important. That delineation is made. Now, why is that important? As you guys know, if we're dealing with, let's say, a multifamily that's in Hollywood and it's, let's say, west of US 1, and we cross US 1 and go east, the numbers are vastly different. And an underwriter would call us out and say, hey, why did you go, east to where the prices are much higher, and use that as a comparable? So that's why knowing your neighborhood is important. And sometimes, so the point is, like, sometimes if you use the tool and pull a bubble that's a mile, wide, that might not be the best case scenario for you to delineate the neighborhood. You should know, like, okay, like east of this and west of that, it becomes a different neighborhood. And sometimes when you go to a listing or you're driving around, in the neighborhood, you have to make note of that, and you see things like, oh, when I'm in this neighborhood, they have swales. As soon as I cross over to this other part, they don't have swales anymore. So it kind of changes the perception and maybe the beauty of it. Okay, so establishing the neighborhoods is very important. Once the neighborhood is established, what we're looking for is properties that are recently sold, and what I mean by that, they should have sold within the last 90 to 180 days. That is the sweet spot. We tried it. We need to have at least 2 comps that close within the last 90 days. Okay. Can we use comps up to a year? Yes, we can. Fannie Mae says we can. That's their guidance. Now, will we cherry pick comps that are older in lieu of newer ones that are more recent? No, that should not happen. Now, everything that I tell you has exceptions. I just did an appraisal in a section called Cherry Blossom, I think. It's north of 595 and west of 95, and it's on the intracoastal. And there's very few homes that have that large of lot size that are intracoastal. The houses are built like in the 70s, and they're larger. So maybe in that scenario, we can go older and or farther out, or a combination. Sometimes an appraiser is not limited just using 3 comps. So they'll use maybe 6 comps, 6 closed sales, or 4 or 5. So there'll be a combination, of closer ones that might be older and going out that might be newer. So that is acceptable. And we're looking to, the important thing is the location and the square footage, the livable square footage under air. Okay, and it's important that you know what the livable square footage is. As you know now, you have to put in the correct GLA, the livable square footage. I myself have been hired multiple times to do, measuring services where we say, okay, the board will say, okay, send us, either an architectural rendering or an appraisal from a certified appraiser that says what the livable square footage is. Again, that's why you want to have an appraiser that you deal with that can fill that service, quickly and efficiently, know what they're doing, because a lot of times there's discrepancies between what the real square footage is and the published square footage, as well as the bedroom and bathroom count. Going back, so we want, now when we talk about the square footage, what we're looking at is what is the livable square footage, and then we can delineate inside the MLS under livable square footage to say, show me properties within 20% of the subject property. Okay, so in other words, if we're, like, let's say 2,000 square feet, you would put between 1,600 and 2,400 livable square feet for the area that we're searching for our neighborhood. Okay. And yes, the ones that are more proximate have a greater worth to us, because, you know, if we're dealing with properties in a subdivision, why are we going like outside first? No, we should always be closest. Just like when we do condo appraising, we always want to look inside the subject property building. In fact, we want to look in the same stack, because we know they have the same base, you know, if it's within certain numbers, because sometimes it changes after you get at lower floors or higher floors, the stacks start changing. But within close range of that floor location, we should have the same exact unit with the same exact view, or, you know, more or less the view. So that's why it's important to use comparables that are proximate, okay, to the subject property. So recently sold, similar in square footage, and proximate. So the other thing that we have to do is we got to use comps that bracket all of the characteristics of the subject property. So what does that mean? It means this: if I have a pool, the subject property has a pool, there's no way that an appraiser should use comparables that don't have pools. It does not make sense. So we have to use at least one or two comparables that have pools to prove that this is what a pool is worth. That just makes sense. Similarly, like if we're on a lake, you know, you got to use comps that, or if we do the vice versa, we're not on a lake. Why would an appraiser use all comps that are on a lake? That doesn't make sense. Okay, so those are important practices that appraisers will employ, which is called bracketing. You have to match every characteristic, you know, as much as you can, as possible. I'll give you an example of one that I couldn't recently bracket. I did a townhouse in Sunrise. It was in an area that had no HOA, and they were a corner unit. And for some reason, the previous owner, who's related to the current owner, they were just looking to see what the value is so that they can sell it. He had a landscaping business and said he needed a garage. So he built a nice 2-car garage. There is not another 2-car garage on a townhouse like anywhere within 3 miles of here. So that's something that I had to reconcile in the appraisal, to basically say that, you know, it had some value, but not much more than a 1-car garage, because there's no market acceptance, there's no market request or like requirement for a 2-car garage on this type of townhouse. And so there are exceptions to everything, and an appraiser should know how to articulate and reconcile those differences. And so that pretty much, you know, is what we're looking at. And once you do the practice, go through the exercise of, before you even look at, you know, any of the other services, just go to the MLS and go in and look at the maps, find out where you are, you know, draw a circle or use the polygon and delineate your neighborhood, and get into the habit. It's gonna be hard at the beginning, but it's going to make you a much better and analytical realtor. And you can then start looking through each listing and reading the listing remarks and looking at the pictures and looking at how that compares to yours. And yes, you will become much better. And then when you look secondarily at the services like the Trulia and Realist and Zillow, you're going to notice, okay, so this service seems to be closer to the correct numbers for this area. Sometimes it's by area that they do better in, okay? And that's just through practice and experience. I also want to encourage you to read appraisals. Not a lot of realtors read appraisals, but you can really learn a lot by, like, retroactively. Like, you close a deal get in touch with the title company and say, hey, send that appraisal to me and let me take a look at it. They'll do it. They know that you're a participant in the deal. You know, more than likely you even recommended the title company. And yeah, you can get a hold of that and then look at it and say, okay, like how was this constructed? How was this appraisal built? And you will be amazed at how much you can pick up just by doing that exercise. And so there are, like, let me put it this way. You should be doing this for every property, for sure, that especially your listings. Are there times when there's so much like noise and information that you can't really put your finger on it? Absolutely. That's when you should defer to a professional. You know, send it to an appraiser, let them, you know, do a professional appraisal on it. Sometimes, I just did one recently with Danya. I think she's in the class today. Sometimes it's a good thing to remove yourself from the pricing of the property. Why do I say this? There are some sellers who are very difficult, and every seller thinks their property is worth $1 million. I know, you know, you can, if you've been doing this for a long time, you can attest to that. And, you know, they sometimes like, so either you're yesing them to get the listing, which is never a good, you know, never a good thing. Or, you know, you hopefully have the comps to support it and say, this is what the comps show. This is like where we should be at. But what I'm saying is that, like, sometimes it's depending on the seller. It's a good thing just to remove yourself and say, hey, listen, let's go ahead and get a professional appraisal done. Let's see where it comes in at, what the market bears, what is the fair market value for this property right now in the condition it is, in the location, not waste each other's time. And I have realtor clients that sometimes they pay for it themselves and they get reimbursed on the end. They say, listen, give me a 6-month listing. I will pay for the appraisal and I'll get reimbursed at closing. Because the whole thing is you don't want to waste your time, your energy, your effort, and get a stale property. That's one of the worst things you can do, is get a listing just for the listing's sake. And then you have to like continuously drop the price. Buyers smell the blood in the water when they see those numbers going down and when the days on market keep climbing up, okay? So you don't want to fashion your business like that, just capturing the listing and then constantly like lowering the prices. I know that some realtors use that strategy. I don't think it's the best strategy. And then sometimes the sellers, they themselves know or will initiate and say, hey, I want to get an appraisal. Even when they get the realtor, they say, I want to get an appraisal. It's a good idea, I think, because you can use that appraisal when the second appraiser comes in. And what do I mean by that? So we, you know, do an appraisal for you know, a said house. We show what the, you know, fair market value is. And then when the next appraiser comes in, now, mind you, you're not supposed to be talking values. We're not influencing the appraiser. You're not supposed to do that. Okay, that's one thing that I also wrote down to talk to you about, how you should prepare for an appraisal. Okay, so when you meet an appraiser, should you be there? Absolutely, you should be there. That's my opinion. There's some appraisers that they show up to the property, they don't even measure the house, which to me, I've never, ever done that. That makes no sense. There's so many discrepancies between public record and what the property really is. You have to know how the system works. When the county has the information and they publish it, that goes off of what the specs and plans were initially. Sometimes those change and the changes are not reported. So I've had it happen where a property could be 600 square feet larger or 400 square feet smaller. That is definitely going to affect and throw a monkey wrench in your whole plans if it's not, you know, caught on the front end and figured out how do we get over this hurdle. So you should definitely be there with, when the appraiser comes to appraise the property. And you should observe if they measure or not. And you should keep a mental note of that. You can provide them comps. You can come prepared. It's just the manner in which you convey the information. You can say, look, here are some comparables that we pulled, and this is what we're basing our price point on. That's all you have to say. Now, some appraisers are going to be, accepting of this information. Some of them are very weird. A lot of them are weird. I don't count myself in that group. I usually take any and all comps from agents. What I respond is, I will definitely take a look at these. I may even do some, but it is to my discretion. They may be correct or they may not be the right comps. I've had realtors give me comps that were identical to the ones that I pulled. And I had one recently in West Palm Beach. It was crazy. The guy gave me comps from 4 or 5 years ago, but he stayed in the neighborhood. So obviously that guy did not know how to pull comps. I looked at the dates. I didn't insult him or anything. I took it. I said, I may or may not use these. I gave my spiel and I moved on. It made the value, so that wasn't the point, but you want to give, if you're going to give us something that is relevant and for us in our industry. And also, yes, you can give them a whole appraisal. You can say, hey, listen, we didn't know how to price this property. It was a little bit difficult. So we had an appraisal done. Here it is. For whatever it's worth for you, you can use it, don't use it, look at it, don't look at it. That's up to you. But here it is. Will it influence that appraiser? 100%. He's going to look at it and he's going to say, oh, wow, he used this approach and this is how he did this and here's how he bracketed this. So it does influence the appraiser without, stepping on toes, because this is what happens. There are some people who don't understand we cannot have value conversations. Sometimes I go to an appraisal and they say to me, hey, I really need this to come in at the 330, do whatever you need to do. I just cringe, because we're not supposed to have that conversation. So I tell them, look, I can't have you a value conversation. I'll do the best I can. And I leave it at that. Now, it does happen where people push the envelope. I've had somebody that emailed me and texted me the same thing. And at that point, I had to get the lender involved, and they still paid me for the appraisal, and they canceled the appraisal with me. So those things do happen. So you have to be careful what you say, especially when it comes to lending appraisals where it's FHA, VA, conventional, that went through the lender and an appraisal management company. We have very strict rules on our side. So you want to be sensitive to that. If it's an appraisal where somebody just hires me, then that's not a problem. We can talk about it. I'm not going to spill the beans immediately and tell you, okay, this is a value, because I have to do my work and come up with the numbers. But I'm more apt to speaking with them. So the other thing that you should bring to an appraisal is a cheat sheet. You should have a cheat sheet of what was done to the appraisal, to the property, as far as improvements, renovations, updates, probably within the last 5 years, even 10 years, or if it's the last owner and they, whatever they did, you could have it written in Excel or Word where it can have the prices of what it costs or not. That's completely up to you guys. You don't have to put the prices, but you can say kitchen full renovation. What did that include? From the flooring to the cabinets, the Italian, real wood cabinets, to grow appliances or that's more for bathroom, but the stainless steel package, Kenmore, Wolf in the Woods, whatever have you, when you give us that information, it's like we can't ignore it, you know, or you can't say that the appraiser didn't, you know, the appraiser didn't do a good job to outline all that information. So if you have that cheat sheet, it's a good thing to give to an appraiser. And the last thing I would say it would be to give the appraiser the survey. The survey definitely helps. It has the measurements of the improvements. It has the easements and the boundaries. All those things are very helpful to us when we do the appraisal, and it goes a long way. So if you can be proactive with that and put a little package together, awesome. It doesn't have to be in a folder. Sometimes people give me a whole folder. That's great, but it doesn't have to be. And the other thing is, you don't even have to bring anything. If you have all the stuff digitally, you can just email it to them. Get the email of the appraiser ahead of time and just send it to them. You don't have to discuss anything. I already sent you everything that we have on this property. You can take a look at it if you like. And then that's pretty much it. So that pretty much covers like what we're looking at as far as how we pull comms, what are we looking at, for comms, and what you should bring to the appraisal. So I think at this point, I just want to, open it up and see what questions you guys have, what problems, what challenges you have, like what have you experienced, that, maybe like how could you have handled situations, differently. I just want to open up the floor, okay?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, how much you charge for appraise a single family housing like Coral Gables?
So my price starts at $450. The more difficult it is, the price does go higher. Me personally, I'm not the cheapest person out there. There are people that charge as low as $275. You can go to Craigslist. There's a guy there that charges $275, and he'll get it to you the next day. The cliche is correct, in my opinion. You get what you pay for. That guy, I took a look at him. I went to the DBPR. He's got complaints against him. He had to go before the probable cause panel and the board. I don't know, what happened, but you have to use your sense of discernment and your gut to make sure that you have the right appraiser. And so that's kind of my spiel on that. Like I do everything as far as the appraisal from A to Z. I don't outsource any part of the appraisal. I don't collaborate or anything. Like everything I do, it's like there's some people who are production appraisers. They do 3-4 per day. That's not me either. I just do one a day, or like let's say one day I'll do maybe 2 or 3 inspections, but then I won't do any more inspections 2 and 3 days until everything is written up. So I hope that answers your question.
And that's the minimum, like let's say townhomes in Kendall. A townhome in Kendall, you charge the same.
I'm sorry, what's your name?
A townhome in Kendall, how much would you charge?
No, I know. What's your name?
James.
James. Okay. James, there is no difference because the time that it takes to keep that appraisal, there is one that would take me in Coral Gables. Yes, smaller. The property is smaller as far as footage, but the approaches and the articulation and the end product is still going to be above 60 pages. It's going to be have the 1004 MC, the market conditions addendum. It's still going to have. It takes me as far as work-wise to do that appraisal.
We're still hearing the background noise, so it's a little bit difficult to get all the information.
Yeah, I think
Somebody
Somebody
has
came back
something in the
on.
background.
Yeah.
I have another question. How close is your numbers to the bank numbers, the appraiser from the banks?
Okay, so that's a very good question. When I do my private appraisals, I do them exactly the way that I would do them when I do it for the banks. That's the exact approach that I use. The form is different, but even though the form is different, it's called a general purpose form. Okay, everything else is the approaches are exactly the same. I'm doing it as if I'm doing it for a lender or a bank.
Okay.
So yeah, so I don't know. There's nothing else to say, to that. Like, how close is it? I do it exactly the same way, because in the end, it has to pass. If I do an appraisal and I try to butter it up or depress it or push it, it doesn't make any sense. It has to be done so that it passes underwriting and lender scrutiny. So that means it goes through audits, it goes through reviews, and so yeah, it has to pass that for sure.
And how long does it take for you to do the appraisal, to give the results?
It's usually like 48 hours after the inspection, and it depends also on like if it's over the weekend or weekday, but it's fairly quickly. It's quicker than, let me put it this way, it's quicker than what you have to wait for when you go through a lender, for sure.
Okay, so like in Westwood Lakes, for example, not just Westwood Lakes, but many neighborhoods. Sometimes you're gonna see price per square foot, 180, and then you see 250, and then you see 300, and then how do you regulate that? And do you use price per square foot when you make valuations?
That's a very good question. What's your name?
It's Dania.
What is your name? I'm sorry?
Dania.
Hi, Dania. Hi, how you doing? So that's a good question, Dania. Like, we don't use price per square foot in residential appraising. That is not an approach that is acceptable under USPAP for the valuation of properties. That is a commonly used realtor approach to determine and kind of gauge the fair market value. It's not something that we use in residential real estate. It is used in commercial, but when we finish an appraisal, like 99%, then there's a box in the appraisal that says, what is the price per square foot, that it gets filled in, and we just, you divide the square footage by the value, and we know now that's what the price per square foot, that's what it came out to be. But we don't use it on the front end. So unfortunately, that is not an acceptable method to determine fair market value in residential appraising.
I don't ever use that, but it's funny because sometimes clients will tell you, oh, but this is 256 per square and the other one is 286, and then I have to tell them like, no, that's not the way it works. But just wanted to hear.
I know, and that's a misconception, and it can be very dangerous, because if you get a property and it's completely renovated and you do those numbers and they say, oh, but this just sold, and of course mine is always better, right? So they just divide it out, and then they come up with this beautiful price per square foot, and they multiply it times their square footage, which might not even be the right square footage, and all of a sudden,
my property's worth $1 million.
Everybody's house is worth $1 million, Dania.
Yeah.
So that you guys have to be very careful, tread very lightly with that, and say, look, yeah, we can use this a little bit to kind of get a like a sense or a range maybe, because you can use the lower end and the higher end and say this is the range. But let's rely on comps, or let's rely on an appraisal, or let's look at, you know, all of these services and see what they're coming up with. I wouldn't you know, use that exclusively and too, you know, strictly. Yeah.
I have a couple of questions, if no one else is going to
Yes.
ask anything.
What's your name?
My name is Surelis or Sue.
Hi, Sue.
Hi. One of the questions that I have is, how do you price new construction on an old neighborhood where the predominant properties are old, are smaller, and you need to then price it because you're like the only one that's brand new? And
Yeah,
have the car
those are always,
coverage?
yeah, that's a good question, and it's always challenging for appraisers, especially when we have, like, just like you said, we have this parcel of land, and it's surrounded by all old homes, and all of a sudden they put in, you know, these brand spanking new ones that are like bigger and nicer. You know, how is that priced out? So from an appraisal standpoint, when we have a new construction, the lenders, they don't want to see just developer sales, because they have an incentive to basically steer the market with their price point, because they basically come up with it and say, oh, this is how much we need to make to be profitable, to show it to our investors, blah, blah, blah. And so, you know, sometimes their numbers are not in sync with the immediate neighborhood. So from an appraisal standpoint, what we usually, the way we construct an appraisal is we do use developer sales, but we want to see resales. As if we have, you know, 2 or 3 resales in the neighborhood, those are completely valid to use, because that already shows what the secondary market is doing in that neighborhood. That the developer sold it, they have nothing more to gain, you know, and now it was resold. And those we don't, you know, you don't need to go outside anymore once we have resales. If we have a brand new development and we just have 1 or 2 sales, then yes, we have to use inside sales and outside sales. And usually the way that we like to structure it is that we may use that new construction developer sale, and then we will go up to maybe 5 miles to look where is the last like new construction development that was built. And we will look at those comps, because from a marketability standpoint, they're going to be very similar. In other words, Sue, if a prospective client came to you and said, hey, Sue, you know, we want a house in this area, but the thing is, I don't want to go into an old house. You know, there's those clients that they need a new house. My wife is one of those. She's like, I want to go to a brand new house. I was like, if everybody thought like that, I mean, they would constantly be tearing down homes and putting up new ones. But there are those people that that's what they want. So in that case, yes, we're the way we're constructing the appraisals, we're using some developer sales, and we're going out to get 1 or 2 or 3 more outside sales. Sometimes in certain areas, there are, like, I'm doing some appraisals, like close to Calle Ocho, and like it's a neighborhood in Southwest Miami, not all the way like Southwest, but like, you know, still close to like 95, that section, like close to Coral Gables, where you have developers that come in and take a 1940s home, but when they're done, it looks like a brand new home.
Right.
So that's when we discuss like age and effective age. I don't know if you guys know the difference. And if you look at the BCPA property card, you will see 2 numbers as far as age and effective age. And I'll tell you what was told to me, because I never forgot it. the age is the actual age, okay? Like when it was constructed, it was CO'd, that is the actual age. The effective age is what does the property look like? And one way to remember it is like Raquel Welch, okay? Maybe I'm dating myself, you know, like another one would be to say J-Lo, okay? J-Lo is probably like, I think she just celebrated her 50th birthday, but she looks like she's 30. Like you can honestly say she looks like she's 30, okay? Maybe not 25, but 30, yes, okay? Or, you know, in Raquel Welch's, you know, example, she's probably close to 90, but you could say that she looks like she's in her 60s. So the effective age is 60. The effective age for J-Lo is 30, okay? And so we look at a home like that, like the house I just did for a client, and he took that 1940s home, which looked like, you know, it was 100 years old, okay? And the effective age can be actually older than the actual age. And he turned it into, when you drive by, you would say, oh, that's a new construction. It's not. It looks like a new construction, but it's not. So in the comparison for new construction, can you use, you know, an older home that's been completely rehabbed? Absolutely. And that's how you can use, you know, an appraiser can use and employ those methods and talk about, you know, why they used it. But that could be a way to price new construction as well. So I hope that answers your question.
I have two more questions if we have time, because I don't want to read the one.
Sure.
Everybody else's time. And that one of it is when you go and do the square footage of the house and it's completely different than the actual records on the county website. For the value of the home on the appraisal, do you go for what's actually physically there that you've measured under AC, or do you have to go back to records? And I mean, I think I know the answer to this, but I want to get it from a certified appraiser.
From the horse's mouth, yes. So the answer is, I always go by what I measure and I perceive. I always, like, it doesn't matter what the public record says. Like, I include the public records because I don't need to hide anything. I want everybody to know this is what public record says, but I have to make a comment. Usually, like when there's a huge discrepancy, I make a comment and say, this is to reconcile the difference between public records and the appraiser's measurements. The appraiser physically measured the property at the time of the appraisal. The public records indicate, 1,500. The appraiser measured 2,200 livable. And then I say, like, are all the areas in a have all areas been completed in a workmanlike manner? Where is the difference? Like, I have to try to, like, guess. Was there an enclosure or something? Is that area safe? Is it habitable? Is it secure? Meaning, can I, like, somehow get into it from the outside? Or is it a secured section of the property? Are there any, obsolescences? What that means is, you go into a house sometimes and you go in the front door and you see like the 3-2, but then there's another 1-1, but you can't reach it from the inside. You have to go outside because they have an in-law quarters. Well, that's called a functional obsolescence, okay? If it's not on public records, that means that they chopped up the house to get to basically have some income from an in-law quarters or guest house. And so we have to normalize that. I say there's no functional obsolescence. Everything is up to grade. Is that, everything, like, does the flooring, like, at the same level? So I will make those commentaries, and then I will say that the appraiser is putting all reliance on the appraiser's measurements at the time of the appraisal inspection, and I'll run with those numbers.
Okay. The last question, and then I would like to make a comment referring back to the square footage that Dania brought up. The last question
Okay.
is because it's happened to me. I used to be a title, well, I used to know, I'm still a title agent, and I saw it happen many times where the closing got held up because there were two appraisals being done, especially with an FHA. It's my understanding with an FHA financing, once the first appraisal goes out there, that stays on record. Now, especially now more than ever after the meltdown, it stays on record and it kind of sets the bar for what the property is worth for the next year or so. Am I correct or incorrect in that?
So no, the appraiser does stay in their system for approximately 3 to 4 months.
Okay.
And if another buyer comes in, they actually don't need to go and get an appraisal. What they do is they use that appraisal on file. So that's why it's important that, and sometimes I hear, realtors scream and kick, because usually what ends up happening is they get a really bum appraisal that was done. It was FHA, and there's no way to get that out of the system, because it just sticks with it. And now, to the detriment of the seller, they pretty much have to, if they don't accept it, then they have to say in the listing, relisted, not accepting FHA buyers. Because with the conventional,
also, if they were to order a second appraisal for an FHA, would that adjust, or
No.
that's not allowed?
No, they would. No, they flat out wouldn't. Once they
Okay.
see
It's
it
only
in the
one,
system,
the first one.
that's it. Yeah. Now, once it's expired, technically after 3 months, then a new one can be, which is like a quarter of the year, right? Then you can push for it and say, okay, we're requesting a new appraisal because it's over 90 days, and so we want for it to reflect the current market. Because remember, the reason that the 90 days is there is because the lenders, they want to see 2 comps within the last 90 days.
Now,
So once it's gone over that, you can rest assured that you don't have that qualification anymore. It's surpassed that threshold.
I guess the last,
Does that make sense?
comment or question, or just kind of like reassurance that I would like to brought up is about when we're doing comps and we're going based on the MLS. And you said the first thing you brought up is that we need to look at the location, specifically the neighborhood. One of the first things that I personally do, I don't know about the rest, is I go into the subdivision, the section, the range. That really narrows down the search into what I'm going to be looking at as far as active, closed, and pending. Pending
That's
doesn't tell
perfect.
me anything, but the rest of the things do. And then I go based on the pictures. And then as far as square footage, I don't know if it's, common or not, but it does help me when I do the math, and the system does it for you. So there is a big factor when you look at what's sold per square footage. And I'm not saying that that's all of it, but I do think it is of great importance, because you could make certain adjustments once you see your listing, if it has upgrades, or if it's just in good conditions, or if it's a very poor condition, then you're going to need to price it down. But just to look at the medium range on that area with that kind of criteria, I think I basically do go a lot by the square footage, because the sellers sometimes, they just have a price in mind, but they're not looking that their house is smaller or it hasn't been upgraded. And that kind of gives me a very big foundation and a solid foundation to what I'm going to suggest the pricing is. And
That's a great
that
contribution.
accurate, because I do go a lot by square footage. And then I kind of, because art, like an appraising, it's an art form at the end of the day, right? But it's an art form with information background, right? So we look at data and then we come up with a suggested price. But that data comes from the square footage per, the dollar per square footage, and then also conditions. Or am I looking at it from the wrong point of view?
So I completely agree with you with the township range and section. If you know how to do that, it's very easy for Broward County. It's a little bit more difficult for Dade. But if you go into Realist and you pull up the Realist property card, it tells you right there what the township range and section is. Like we know how to figure it out just from the folio number. But once you enter that information, that is a great way to start to look at what your initial comps are, because it brings you right down to the subdivision. So it's a great way. I don't know if any of you remember ISCNet. It was like a DOS-based program like years ago that then turned into RealQuest and RealList. And we used to do the F1 and F2. Some realtors were aware of that. That was exactly that. The township range section was F1, and then F2 was like taking away the section and just going to the township range, and so it would expand. And so, yeah, so that's a very good approach. And yes, the square footage is really the most important thing next to where the location is, because it has to be within that parameter of 20%, more or less. Once you fall out of that, then we say from an appraisal standpoint, that is not really comparable. That's something else, and once you see that it's, greater or less than the 20% is when you start seeing big jumps and differences in bedroom bathroom counts, so you want to stay close to that square footage. And when we construct appraisals, the perfect appraisal would be like they're exact models and there's no difference in the square footage. We know that doesn't happen too often. So then the next best thing is that we bracket or sandwich. We get some that are a little bit, bigger and some that are smaller. So then we bracket that characteristic. And then we also obviously do that with the lot size. We want some that are we don't make adjustments for lot size if it's under 1,000 square feet. We don't make adjustments for livable square footage if it's under 100 square feet. So anything over 100 and 1,000 in the lot size, we want to bracket. We want to use maybe some that are a little bit over, some that are a little under, so that is like kind of the sweet spot for underwriters when they see that from an appraisal. If we don't exercise that, we have to do something called an across-the-board adjustment. And an example would be, I'll give you this example. I did a townhouse appraisal in Pembroke Pines. It had townhouses and villas on the end. You know them, you've seen them. These were fee simple. They owned the land. And so this one was it was a villa and had a nice wooden shadow box fence around it. And over there on the side yard, it had a gorgeous swimming pool. It was a black swimming pool. I'll never forget it. Salt water, heater, they entertained. It was just beautiful. And so I did the appraisal. I could not find one comp. I went out 5 miles from there. I could not find one comp, because it was like West Pembroke Pines, that had that same feature. It was a townhouse villa. I could not find it. So all my comps, when I wrote pool in the line item, said no pool, no pool, no pool. So then on that, normally you'd have to make an across-the-board adjustment, because all the adjustments are going the same direction. That is like, that's a red flag in underwriting. In this particular case, I argued that the pool had no value from an appraisal standpoint. And the underwriter agreed with me. And the reason for that is because it wasn't like it was East Fort Lauderdale or, you know, that where the townhouses over there, some of them have pools. They look more like jacuzzis, you know, or some of them have pools. It wasn't that location. Where we were at, even going back in time like 3 years and expanding 5 miles, there was no other one in the area. That means that there's no market acceptance for it. Nobody really wants that. Somebody had the money and was there and was able to do it, and they did it. So they got enjoyment of use, what we call. It had an intrinsic value, but it did not have a contributory value. And there is a difference, guys. The intrinsic value is just basically like a buyer saying, oh, this is awesome. You know, besides getting this beautiful, you know, villa, we're also getting a pool, you know? And that might sway them to purchase the property. That doesn't mean that it has to have necessarily a contributory value from an appraisal standpoint, and it didn't. So, you know, that's why they always say, like, you know, be careful, you know, owner of their property, what you do, because even though you think it might, you know, return value to you, you know, give you an ROI, sometimes it doesn't. You know, sometimes people drop a pool and they say, oh, it's going to increase the value. Really? You're going to drop 40,000. What is the contributory value of a pool in the area? Guess what? It might be 20. It might be half that. You might be throwing away $20,000. Now, one, you know, I'm going off of tangents here, guys. But one thing that I feel really holds its value are impact windows. When they put in impact windows, it beautifies the property, it insulates the property, it's much more efficient, it doesn't leak. Security, it helps. Obviously, it helps with storms. You know, you should be getting tax breaks on it.
Discount.
The insurance discount. There's so many pluses to getting the impact windows. And besides that, you know, buyers just eat it up. And from an appraisal standpoint, guess what? When I do an appraisal, that's something I have to bracket. I can't use, say the subject property has impact windows and then not use 2 or 3 comps that have impact windows. And guess what? Invariably, the properties that have the impact windows will sell higher. So I'm a huge fan of the impact windows, and those are ones that, you know, I've not done one appraisal where they put those in and not gotten back at least dollar for dollar. So I hope that answers your question, Sue.
Yes,
Hi,
thank
Moody.
you.
This is Chandra speaking. I'm one of the
Hey,
YPM
Chandra, how you
board
doing?
members.
Chandra,
Good.
again.
We have been talking the past couple days.
Yes.
Thank you for
Yes, my
answering my
dear.
questions, by the way.
Thank you.
But
No
there are a
problem.
couple questions in the chat. I'm not sure if you can see them, so I want to read them to you just to make sure that we can get to the questions. Is that okay?
That's fine, and because
Okay.
I'm not seeing those. So yeah, please help me out.
Okay.
That's fine.
Perfect. Okay, so someone asked, Morris, she's here obviously in the meeting with us, and she's asking, or he, I apologize, is there a common process that an appraiser should always do? For example, pictures, measure each room, etc.
Oh, is there like a specific like format that we do? Not really. You know, when I first started appraising, it was crazy. It was like bonanza. Like there was the Gold Coast was just churning out appraisers, and this was, you know, at the Oakland location off of like 31st over there before they moved. And when I started with Rosenthal, they were just like, okay, go appraise. We did nothing. So we just like, you know, it was like the blind leading the blind. But so, you know, every appraiser has a different approach. Like most appraisers, I would say they want to just get the measurement first. So, you know, we want to, like, from, if it's a single family home, what we're doing is we're measuring the outside of the house. Okay, that is the correct method. If it's fee simple, we're measuring the outside of the house. If it's a condo ownership, we're measuring the interior airspace. Okay, we do not measure from the outside because technically on condos, you only own the airspace. You do not own the outside. That's why, you know, they don't paint their own units, and even windows and such things are handled by the condo association. So usually we like to get the measurements out of the way. And then once we do that, we plot the floor plan and say, okay, you know, this is the foyer, this is the living room, dining, kitchen, you know, these are bedrooms and bathrooms, you know, we go through that. And when we measure, you know, we're taking the pictures of everything that we see from the outside, including, you know, appraisers should be taking pictures of any deferred maintenance, which I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, there's a lot of misconception, you know, hey, why did the appraiser mention that there's wood destroying organism damage in the fascia? It's because we have to. An appraisal asks us, what are the upgrades and what are the issues of deterioration? What are the issues of deferred maintenance? If we see it, and, you know, for me, even if there's an electrical socket that does not have the faceplate on it, I'm going to ding it. It's not going to affect the value, but I am going to compel you to put a faceplate back on. I think that one of the best things that you can do is go to Home Depot or Lowe's or whatever hardware place you use, Ace, buy yourself a bunch of faceplates, and, you know, as a favor to your client, you know, have a little screwdriver and put those in, because that will stop an appraisal. It won't affect the value, but it will stop it. So there's no like specific order. I would say it just depends on the appraiser. I like to measure first and then do the floor plan, and that's pretty much it. And the time that it takes me depends on how big the place is, but it's pretty much anywhere from like a half an hour to an hour, I would say, generally speaking.
Okay, perfect. So another question we have here, which is from Danya. She asked, can substantial upgrades push a property to be valued way over the last comparable sales? Is there a cap? At what point does a property become an over improvement?
That is a very good question, Danya. And yes, we have seen those types of properties where it's still considered an obsolescence or an over improvement or an over adequacy, that whereby a homeowner, you know, because they like it or they feel that they're compelled to do it, they do something that is way over as far as like what the neighborhood typical home does. So yes, like I'll give you like an extreme example. There's in the same neighborhood in North Miami where there's a big Hasidic community. One guy that moved from New York and probably sold a couple homes or his properties, came down here with a bag of money, bought 2 lots, tore them down, combined the folios to one, and built a mega mansion. Now, when you drive by on this street, maybe one day you will, it'll hit you like a ton of bricks. Like you'll be driving by and you'll be like, what the hell is that? Because every house is like 1,000 to like 1,500 square foot, built in like the 50s home. And then you have a brand new construction mega mansion that should be like, you know, on Las Olas or something, right? And what happened is he used cash, and then he was like, okay, I'm going to refinance to get some cash out and do some stuff. Well, amongst appraisers, that is like, you know, one of those tales that you say, hey, did you get the North Miami mega mansion? And everybody's like, yeah, I got it. And we declined it because there's just no comparison. You can't go 12 miles, you know, somewhere else for a comps. And, you know, you can't say really that the property is worth the highest sales of the neighborhood, because it just makes no sense. So it's in super adequacy, we call it. And I've declined it even back when I was at Rosenthal's. And I don't know, like, you know, he has to basically, when he sells it, he has to sell it to somebody that's a cash buyer because they're not going to be able to get a mortgage on it. That's an extreme case. But yeah, I did have another one in Hialeah where, yeah, the houses were like run of the mill, normal, you know, nothing super. But I went into this guy's house, and I swear, as soon as you couldn't tell from the outside, but when I stepped inside, it was like a museum. I mean, it was unbelievable. Granite, marble, the ceilings, woodwork, millwork, the kitchen. It was just stunning, stunning. It did not belong in that neighborhood in Hialeah. And he was like so proud. And he was like, listen, you can't use any comps in this neighborhood. You got to go like 4 miles this way, and those are the right comps. And I'm like, we're done. You know, this is, you can't tell me what comps to use. And you know, it's just not gonna make any sense as far as the value is concerned. I think that one I did end up doing. I just used the comps that I knew from an appraisal standpoint, which were the highest comps available in that neighborhood, and the rest was it was an over improvement. So yes, there are certain times when a client will do things, and hopefully those people talk to realtors and talk to maybe an appraiser that say, hey, should I do this? I know I can, but should I do this? A lot of times people think, oh, I'm going to stay here for such a long time that they're going to get the, you know, enjoyment of use. And then something happens, life happens, and they have to move, and all of a sudden they're not getting their return on investment. So we do see those scenarios. I hope that answered that.
I don't know if anybody has any questions, but in the chat, there's a little bit of a discussion in regards to the comment that you made about fixing the caps or replacing the caps on like the light switches and stuff, and how it wouldn't necessarily affect the appraisal, but it would stop it. Can you give other examples of things that would be flagged in an appraisal that may possibly need to be corrected before for financing purposes? And
So
somebody else is asking,
yeah.
I'm sorry. After that, if you can quickly just answer, if possible, how much a garage is worth, just generally speaking.
Okay. So I have put together, it's a 2-page little report that I want every one of you to have. I've sent it to Kevin, and I'm going to ask that he share it with you guys. It's Moody's quick checklist. Okay, it's basically a checklist of what it is that appraisers are looking for when we go out to the property. Because yes, there are things that you should know. Like you should, like, if you take this with you, I guarantee you it will definitely help you a lot to look at it from the prism of an appraiser, not so much as a realtor. You know what you have to do as a realtor. It's like declutter, 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 you know, and maybe stage and, you know, spruce here and there, and maybe, you know that part, you know that inside and out. But this is very helpful to you, so you can look at it the way that we look at properties. And yeah, so there's 30 items on here. Another quick one is this. Is the electric, are the utilities on? It's a simple one, but guess what? Lenders, if the utilities aren't on, they're going to send us back. They're going to say, put the utilities on and go back again. So, you know, if it's a vacant property, obviously if it's occupied, that's it. I mean, I'm hoping, because I've done appraisals where there were people there and there was no electric and no water. So I'm not even going to go any further than that. But let's just say there were buckets of water. So yeah, so electric and utilities should be on. Chipped and flaking paint. Well, guess what, you guys check off that box in the contract all the time, but have you stopped to say, what year was this built? Have I looked for chipped and flaking paint? Is there chipped and flaking paint? Because guess what, if there is and I see it, it doesn't matter if it's FHA or conventional. I'm going to say, listen, you need to abate this problem. And if you know on the front end, if you do it once around and you see in the fascia or the soffits or the garage or where have you, interior or exterior, as long as it's 1978 or before, I'm gonna ding it. That's one thing. Smoke alarms. Smoke alarms, there should be one within 10 feet of the kitchen. There should be one inside the bedroom. Security bars. The lock and key security bars are obsolete. You have to, from the bedrooms, you either have to remove it or retrofit it to the ones that are allowed, which is either the wing nut or the pedal system. Sometimes, you know, like we represent, you know, you guys represent properties where they have the hurricane shutters up. They're like, I'm not going to put it down. I'm not taking it down because we're in hurricane season. Guess what? Those are acting as security bars or security apparatus. That means that we don't have a second point of egress. Remember, it's a bedroom. What defines a bedroom? A bedroom is a property that has ingress, egress, and the second point of egress. That means it has to have a window that we can get out of, not just the entrance. And if we have that shut, that, you know, with the panel shutters, then we have a problem. It's not, those have to come down. It doesn't matter if the homeowner is lazy, it has to be done, you know, and we don't even think about that. In FHA, so many times the door between the garage and the kitchen, they've changed it. Sometimes they put the like the cat flap thing where the cat goes through or the dog goes through. So they've changed that door. That door needs to be a solid wood or metal door. It has to be fire retardant. And so many times they change that door, and guess what? In the appraisal, I make them put it back. I'm like, this is the wrong door. And they huff and they puff and they still do it. Okay. You know, there's a lot of other things. Power lines, like there should be, like, the trees should not be over the roof or hitting the roof. Trees should not be hitting power lines. You know, the windows, you know, do we have a secure property? I know you guys don't check the windows, but you know who's going to check them? I'm going to check them. An appraiser is going to check the windows, especially if it's FHA. Not on conventional, but on FHA, I go around and I check each window. Sometimes when they're older windows, you know, the latches, those are broken. They don't even work. So that means I can open it from the outside. That's an unsecured property. I'm going to compel the people to fix it. So there are things that, like, again, that's why you should have a handyman that can, like, just make things right. They don't have to replace things. They don't have to, you know, go all out for the most part. A lot of these things can be easily fixed on the front end and prepared for the appraiser so that there's no issue. It just becomes easy breezy. And you become a genius in front of your seller. So this thing I've put together, it's very helpful. And that's the response I've gotten from numerous realtors that I've shared it with. And I've sent it to Kevin digitally. Feel free to, you know, send it to whomever you want, any of your friends or colleagues. I'm happy to share it with you.
Thank you for that resource. We appreciate it. We'll make sure that Kevin gets that out to everyone.
I do have a
Sure.
question.
Yeah.
Yes.
How do you
What's your name?
approach Nancy?
Hi, Nancy.
Hi. How do you approach, or for instance, I work the Redlands. I don't know if you know the Redlands. And properties are really far away from each other. There's not that many sales, and most of them are farms. How do you approach that type of property, and when you have no sales within 5 miles to compare?
Well, we more than likely will have properties within 5 miles. That I can assure you. But yes, the answer is that, you know, the Fannie Mae's guidance of, like, you know, comps being within 1 mile kind of goes out the window. And we see that in you know, Davie and Southwest Ranches, Plantation Acres. You know, there's even places here. I'm in Broward in Sunrise that we have the same challenges. And an appraiser, seasoned appraiser, should know how to approach those. Basically, what we do is we employ, like, you know, when we have areas of what we call low population density, it's not the same as like the tract homes in Weston where we, you know, within a one, you know, square mile, we have like so many properties. And so invariably we'll have sales. In those, you know, areas where we have properties on 1 acre, 2 or 5 acres or more, well, you know, less than 10 acres, because then it becomes commercial. But, you know, when we have those scenarios, like most of them are on one, let's say between 1 and 3 acres, then yeah, we have to expand and we have to go old. And we will construct an appraisal using those two methods. And, you know, this, I'll tell you what my supervisor told me when I first started appraising. And this is, I guess, the art side of appraising, because I do feel that there's a lot of science to it, but yes, it's like a combination, is that she said that you can do anything that you want in appraising, but you have to be able to defend it, and you have to articulate why you did what you did and how you formulated that, how you constructed that appraisal. And so that's where a lot of appraisers, I feel that they fail, is because they have a feeling, or they were told, but they don't know how to, in a narrative sense, write and defend what it is, the approaches that they're employing, what they're doing. They don't know how to do that. That's where a lot of appraisers fail. And that's when you get into trouble with, you know, with underwriters, and you keep getting conditions and more conditions and, you know, add comps. I don't get those. I don't get add a comp or take away comp. That just, to me, that's a huge waste of time. And again, that goes into like not taking too many appraisals and production issues and stuff like that. But so in that case, yes, we're basically expanding our area. Like, instead of doing township, range, and section, we will say, okay, let me search by zip code, okay? Or let me search by keyword, and, you know, we'll put in Redlands or something like that. And that will, you know, or we'll delineate it even with the mapping program. And that will say, okay, you know, these are, for all intents and purposes, these are reliable alternative properties to the subject property. And then, you know, we'll try to get some that are closer, that might be older, and just do a combination of both. On the older comps, you know, if we can prove that there was an increasing market over the past year, the appraiser would be, you know, correct to apply positive time adjustments, as long as, again, he can articulate and defend what he's doing. Again, that's where appraisers get into trouble, when they artificially kind of deflate an appraisal because the market was increasing and they didn't make time adjustments. That makes no sense to me. If I can prove to you in the appraisal that the market is increasing over the past year, guess what? Comps over 3 months, you know, you should be applying time adjustments to them. You know, just like we did when in 08, when things were decreasing, you know, we had to use negative time adjustments for older comps. So I don't know if, you know, with the coronavirus, what the effect is going to be on housing in the next, you know, 1 or 2 quarters, if we're going to see a slump. I know personally, from an appraisal standpoint, I've had some appraisal canceled on me, citing the coronavirus. They were skittish, they were nervous, and said, nope, we're not doing anything right now, and they yanked it. So, you know, I don't know how that's going to affect us in the future, as far as real estate and appraising, but yeah, so that's how I would approach the Redlands and properties that are located in a low population density area. Mm-hmm.
All right, somebody
Okay, thank
asked,
you.
do you
Thank
do
you, Eric.
pencil searches And if so, how much? And what is the turnaround time?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Sometimes you guys don't want a full appraisal. Pencil searches is like one of those buzzwords like that we have to be careful using it. Technically, they're illegal, okay? Now, what I do to get around that legal part is because this is what USPAP says. If we're at a party and, you know, you're like, oh, look at my beautiful house, you know, it's so nice and all this and that, what do you think it's worth? If I tell them, hey, this is a gorgeous house, I know the neighborhood, you know, it's worth $500,000. If I say that, I have a responsibility as an appraiser that if I say that, that is actually considered an appraisal. It's a verbal appraisal coming from me. If it's from anybody else, you know, it is what it is. But from an appraiser, it's an appraisal. USPAP says if I do that, I better have all of the data saved, either digitally or printed, where I can construct an appraisal to substantiate what I told that person verbally. So guess what? That's what I have to do. I have to, you know, I have investor clients and I have realtor clients that I do those for, but I create a file. I create a file number within my system. I print the subject. You know, I have everything digitally. I don't like, you know, printing paper. And I put the subject. I'll put the comps. I'll even do a market analysis, and I'll save that so that I'm doing it legally. And I do those for $175, so $175, because it does take time, it does take effort, and a lot of times they're invaluable for my, especially for my investor clients, because they need something quick. They don't want me to come all the way out to the property. They don't want to spend, you know, $450 at a minimum. So for them, I have some that I get 2-3 a week, and they love them. And sometimes they're even ARV little, I call them consultations instead of pencils. And so they want to know, like, hey, if I take this property and I do what you know that I'm going to do to it, like, you know, the kitchen, the bathrooms, flooring, roof, paint, what could it garner? That's what they want to know. Most of my investors, and yeah, so I do those, but I have to stay above board. So I hope that answers the question.
Are you
Are you guys there? Do you have?
Are you gonna be emailing us that sheet and your contact information and so forth?
Yeah, in fact, yeah, Kevin said he would do that. But the sheet actually has my contact information at the bottom. It has my name, it has my cell phone number on there. So yeah, but yeah, Kevin did say that he would oblige with that information. Mm-hmm.
You use the MLS to come up with your comparables, like our same MLS, or do you have a different system?
No, I'm a part of the board of the same board that you guys are part of, Miami. Yeah, I used to be, with Hialeah, but then of course, they merged. So yeah, I've been with the Miami Board of Realtors for quite a while. So yeah, I just use the MLS straight up. Mm-hmm.
There's one technical question that I have when I'm getting ready to do the presentation, like a CMA. Mm-hmm. And before I email the report, there's a section, the last one before we're finished, where you can make adjustments based on bedrooms or bath or square footage and so forth. And I really don't use it a whole lot. So I came across of it because I had a listing recently that I took on, and I was trying to make another CMA of another kind. So when I was trying to adjust the square footage, because my property was like around 200 square foot, less than most of everything that had sold, I didn't know how to do it there. Do you know what I'm talking about?
What is your name?
Sureli Sue.
Oh, Sue. Okay. Sue, unfortunately, I cannot help you with that. I've seen those printouts where realtors do those types of CMAs where they actually plug in adjustment for reconciliation of differences in characteristics. But we do not use those. Realtors, appraisers rather, we don't use those. We only reconcile right in our appraisal form. So there would be no reason for us to produce such a product. So unfortunately, I've seen those, but I can't help you. I have to refer you to the board. I'm sure that they have some training sessions specific
I'll have to go
to.
back for one of those or give them a call.
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, guys. Any problems or any scenarios that you've come across that I know that it's sometimes hard on the spot to remember them, and then as soon as the session ends, you're like, oh, I forgot to ask him. But you can always contact me. Feel free to call me. I love to teach. I love to explain things, and I feel that I'm patient with that. So I'm happy to help you guys, answer questions, even after the session. But is there anything for that maybe you have that could help out the whole group? Because I guess we're up to 31 participants now.
Do you appraise condos?
Yes, I do appraise condos. So I'm a residential real estate appraiser. I do have a partner that does commercial. So if you guys have commercial properties that need appraised, you can reach out to me. But yeah, the residential is from 1 to 4 units legally. If it goes over that, it becomes a commercial property. Yeah. Don't be shy, guys.
Okay, so I got a question. When it comes to fourplexes, duplexes, triplexes, do you take into consideration the rental value when it comes to deciphering a value for the property?
So we do look at what is the rent roll to adequately fill out and respond to the form, what it asks as far as what is the gross rent multiplier, and so we do have to find that that information out. But ultimately, it still comes down to the sales comparison approach. We're still looking at what are the most recent sales of similar duplexes, triplexes, and quads in the area that have sold recently, and we reconcile the square footages and the differences, and then we come up with the fair market value. But yes, if when you're representing one of those properties, you do want to provide the appraiser with that info of what the rent roll is, and even unit A pays like $1,500 and they've been here since March of 2017 or whatever, so that we can factually represent that information.
Okay, another question. What about brand new construction in a developed neighborhood, like an older neighborhood? For example, there's a couple of areas that they're doing that, in Westchester area, and then in the South Miami Heights area, you'll see brand new construction listed at 375, 400, but yet all the comparables are in the 280, 300s. So how do you address that if there's no comps?
Yeah, so that was one of the questions. I think you probably joined us a little bit later. So just to reiterate, guys, when we have a new construction development, we have to use inside comps, and the lenders want us to either use resales or they want us to go outside. Ideally, there's resales within the subject community that we can
I'm not
use.
talking
and
about.
that will,
I'm sorry to cut you off, but I'm not talking about communities. I'm talking about like they buy a plot of land. They develop a single plot of land. How do you?
oh, you mean one person buys? Okay, I see what you're saying. Yeah. Okay, so in that case, when you have a single, like a spec home that somebody buys a plot of land and puts a new construction on it, we pretty much use the same approach. We are going to expand the area, and we're going to look for recent new construction, as recent as possible. Sometimes it is to the detriment of that specific person because they're putting it up a new construction in an area that's much older, that doesn't have like the homes that I was talking about, where they take an older home and completely rehab it, and you have a brand new effective date, let's say an effective date of 5 years, even though it's like a 50-year-old home. And so it is difficult. Usually those people are doing refis, or maybe they're doing a sale. And in those cases, unfortunately, what we're seeing is that the property is worth more than the neighborhood, and a specific buyer really wants it. Invariably, they will come out of pocket the difference between the appraised price and the sales price and the contract price to fill the gap. Because again, just because an appraiser doesn't come up with the value doesn't mean that that's that the contract price is wrong. The contract price could be right, but ultimately the value of the appraisal is only what we can prove at the time of the effective date that that's what it's worth. Do you understand?
Yeah, but there's no like specific, like for example, if the last comps are 280, is there like a certain cap, like it can go as high as 300, or is it like it's capped at the 280? There's nothing you can do, and if they like it, they have to pay out of pocket.
So usually what underwriters who kind of dictate how appraisers approach things is that they don't want to see that the value of the property is over the highest sale used in the comp selection. So that is correct. What you're saying is like your highest sale is 280. Unless we have a successive sale, maybe there's a pending or an active, but that's not going to help because those are just to demonstrate, future value. But unless it's closed, it doesn't factor into it. Then that's where it's basically going to end up around the 280 mark. Now, maybe the appraiser's a little flexible and says, well, that's within a mile, but if I go 1.5 miles or 2 miles, I found a property that, is at 295. Do they have the latitude and, the ability to maneuver to indicate that that's, the high point and use the high end of that value? Yes, they can. And that's up to the discretion of the appraiser.
So that's why appraisals can never really go over, and the reason for the increase in the values in the market is typically because people are willing to pay over the appraisals, and that's kind of how prices are jumping up. I've seen it in my business multiple times, people paying 20, 30.
It's true. That is absolutely true. It happens all the time. It's an imperfect part of the appraisal practice. It doesn't make sense actually. If let's say it's not an over improvement and you've just done your house a little bit nicer than the other ones, and maybe it's a slightly larger, it would make sense that the value is higher than the highest sale in the neighborhood. and that you shouldn't have to cap it at the high sale, which is inferior or lesser in square footage. It does make absolute sense to that, you know, it should have a higher value. And usually the way I approach that, me personally, is I try to push by maybe going outside of my immediate area and using that one comp to say, look, you know, I don't consider the subject property an over improvement. It is well appointed and it is, you know, slightly larger. It is not atypical. That is a big thing. When an appraiser says it's atypical, it's like they're shooting the appraisal in the head, because that means that's a red flag, by the way, for a lender. When they see atypical, they're saying, oh, if this loan goes bad, we're going to have a hard time selling this property. And so that you never want to see in an appraisal. So, you know, usually it should say something like the property is not atypical. And then, you know, using that one extra comp and applying it and making the adjustments and then supporting that higher value. That's how I would approach something like that.
I have a question. Do you ever use the cost of building the property as an appraiser?
So the cost approach is sometimes requested by the lender. It's not required anymore, but some lenders still press for it. It's one of the 3 approaches that we use. And there are some clients that require it because, let's say, for instance, I get a request from an insurance company and they say, hey, Moody, I need you to do this. I'm hiring you to do this appraisal. We're using it specifically for insurance purposes. Then, yes, I will do you know, both approaches. In other words, the sales comparison approach, and I will develop the cost approach. And that's how we will structure that. Most of the time, the only thing that the appraiser is required to include is the land value, but not to develop, you know, what used to happen is they used to use our appraisals to underwrite the insurance. And we don't want them to do that. We don't want them to rely on the appraisal. They should use their own matrix and their own systems to do that. So I hope that answers that question.
Oh yeah, definitely. Come on, people, let's ask.
So when you said earlier in regards to over improvements in neighborhoods, I've actually seen quite a few properties that are brand new. Like I told you, investors, I actually work with some of them that would like to build new properties in pieces of land, you know, that are, I guess, in neighborhoods that are more established, older, less value. And I've actually seen them successfully sell properties for $200,000 more. Like, for example, in a $300,000 or $400,000 neighborhood, they're selling for $600,000 and they're actually appraising at that. How is that possible?
Well, it's possible because they're taking a huge gamble. They're taking a huge risk. I'm glad you've seen it, you know, go positive for them, because I've seen just as many that go like down the toilet, excuse my expression, for some. You know, if they don't do their research, if they don't know what they're doing, they can lose their shirt, literally. I have a buddy of mine that was a loan officer. He threw his hat into the development game, you know, built a property that was an over improvement on an intracoastal, and he ended up losing like $800,000. His parents are still not talking to him after 2 years. So, you know, who footed most of that money and obviously incurred that loss. So, you know, that's why they're speculators, and there are losses, there are wins. You know, you take a W, you take an L, but it's a gamble, and you know, that's all you can chalk it up to. You know, you can make an educated guess and hope that you have at the right time also, because you sometimes see it where a property, you just keep driving by it and you see it hasn't moved, it hasn't moved. Guess what? It's called carrying cost. You know, if you figured out some kind of a profit, and then every month by month, you're paying, you know, the VIG or the utilities or what have you on that property, you're chipping away at your profit until you're going to go to a negative, you know? So, you know, sometimes people's timing is perfect and they have, you know, willing buyers to come out of pocket. You know, we see that a lot in, you know, I have a lot of my Latino clients that, you know, they're bringing in people with bags of money from Argentina or Colombia, Venezuela, and you know, they're not getting appraisals, which I never understand why they're not getting appraisals, because they're overpaying for properties and they just prefer to have it in a house. They treat it like a bank instead of keeping it in their banks in their respective countries because of the volatility. And yeah, you know, you don't notice the problem until the exit strategy happens. You know, that's when they're going to take a hit because it's not worth what they bought it for, or where they refi, it's not worth what they bought it for. So, but yeah, those things happen a lot, especially in South Florida.
What about flipping properties? Like, let's say I bought a property for $160,000 6 months ago. I just renovated it and now I'm selling it for $360,000. How do you address that, like as an appraiser? There has to be some sort of a seasoning period. I know for different types of loans, there's different types of seasoning periods, especially FHA. But I mean, is it possible to have a $160,000 house turn up into a $360,000 on an appraisal standpoint, like a year later?
Absolutely, that's a great question. I just got done going through this with a client and a lender. With that particular lender, for the prospective buyer, I had done the first appraisal. In fact, that seller used me to do the appraisal when he purchased the property because he got a hard money loan, and I did the appraisal for the hard money. He liked the way it worked, used me to do the appraisal for the buyer on the second appraisal. And then what happened was exactly what you said. It was not seasoned, which it needed to be seasoned 6 months. It was 2 weeks short of 6 months. So that triggered a second appraisal. And everybody was so nervous and, oh my gosh, what are we going to do? But I told them, I said, the value is correct. It doesn't matter who appraises it next, you know, just let them do their job and it'll come in. And that's exactly what happened. Now, with that particular scenario, it triggered it because of the seasoning was under. But if it's over, there should never be a problem from an appraisal standpoint to demonstrate what the actual fair market value is. The problem is with everybody else looking at the prior sale price. And they get very uncomfortable and they start screaming and you know, just they're very nervous because they say, oh, how is it possible? We bought it for $160 and they're doubling it in less than a year. Well, it's how the appraiser paints the picture. We have to understand what happened. Number one, that property could have sold for as a short sale. It could have sold as a foreclosure. It could have been an estate sale. So that's the first thing, to demonstrate to the reader of the report, hey, number one, this property sold below market value. It was in deplorable condition. Sometimes I put in pictures of the condition that it was from the client, or maybe from an old MLS, or when that MLS happened, to show what the condition of the property was. Then I get a cheat sheet from the seller, from the developer, and say, hey, give me something that outlines everything that you've done, soup to nuts, in this property. That is the second part of it. They help me with that. I get all that information. It's called like an affidavit of improvements from the seller. Then my part is to say, this is the product, completely renovated, kitchen, bathrooms, flooring, paint, impact windows. And now these are the most relevant comps for this product. Obviously, you have a contract, so you have a willing buyer, okay? It was exposed to the open market. You know, you can even, sometimes you have multiple offers. I get an affidavit of offers to show, you know, the reader of the report and underwriter that this is not a lone crazy person, that there were multiple offers on the property. Those help as well. And then the comps to show what is the true fair market value, apples to apples. And again, when I articulate the appraisal in that manner, it just goes through. I hope that answered that question.
Does anybody have any more questions? I see a lot of thank yous for the info presentation. Thank you for giving us your time and knowledge. Thank you for the valuable information. Thank you for everyone for attending. Thank you for your knowledge and your time.
Listen, it was my pleasure. I'm honored to have done this presentation to so many people. And I, you know, under other circumstances, you know, I wish it would have been face to face, but you know, it is what it is. You know, I hope that you guys are very careful out there. And you know, with meeting people and this whole coronavirus business, and I hope that we all get through it together. And you know, I'm here for you or your clients. If you have any follow-up questions, you know, if you want to email me or call me, I'm happy to help you anytime.
Rudy, what is your phone number so I can
can.
write it here on the chat?
Yeah, my cell phone is 954-553-1243. So that's 954-553-1243. My email is appraisal21@gmail.com.
Got it. So I shared it there.
All
Whoever
right.
wants to write it down, I just used him as an appraiser, and he's phenomenal, very educated, very well spoken, very well received. Thank you for everything, Rudy.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Rudy.
Danya. And
Thank you.
Thank you.
thanks, guys. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, okay?